morning, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Mr. Nelson.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense rests.
Thank you. Mr. Blackwell, does the state have rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Good morning, Your Honor, counsel, ladies and gentlemen. The state will recall to the stand Dr. Martin Tobin. In just one moment, Your Honor.
Not a problem. Dr. Tobin, since we are recalling you, I'm going to swear you in again.
Yep.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
You have a seat again. And just for the record, if you could restate your name and if you feel comfortable, take the mask off.
Okay. My name is Martin Tobin.
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Tobin.
Mr. Blackwell?
Thank you for rejoining us. Got just a few follow-up questions
Yeah.
to ask you in rebuttal. But first, just so you're introduced to the jury, you're a pulmonologist,
Correct. Lung specialist. Yeah.
a critical care physician,
Yeah, intensive care doctor.
and you've studied the physiology of breathing for 46 years.
Correct. Yeah.
I want to first ask you about the issue of Mr. Floyd's potential exposure to carbon monoxide.
Yes.
Were you able to hear testimony regarding this yesterday?
Yes, I was.
Were you able to see this particular slide and the highlighted statement at the bottom? In 7 minutes, Mr. Floyd's carboxyhemoglobin could have increased by 10 to 18%.
Correct. Yeah, I saw that.
Would you first just tell us right off the bat, do you agree with that proposition that's highlighted there?
No, I do not.
Now, would you tell us what carboxyhemoglobin is?
Yeah. Carboxyhemoglobin is when the carbon monoxide combines with the protein in a blood that's called the hemoglobin. And so it's the combination of the carbon monoxide and that protein in the blood.
And why is carboxyhemoglobin, again, important?
It's important because when the carbon monoxide binds to the hemoglobin, it displaces the oxygen off the hemoglobin. So you need the oxygen on the hemoglobin. You don't want the carboxy in it. It takes it over.
Then do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether this statement that Mr. Floyd's carboxyhemoglobin could have increased by 10 to 18% is reliable?
No, I believe it is not reliable.
Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen why that statement is not reliable?
I base it on the arterial blood gas that was obtained when Mr. Floyd was in Hennepin County.
Please, sidebar. I think the objection should be sustained, but just rephrase the question.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Tobin, as you prepare to tell us why these results, in your opinion, are not reliable, could you please help the jury to understand something about oxygen saturation testing in the blood?
Right. So if you have, like was done in Mr. Floyd when he went to Hennepin County, he had an arterial blood gas obtained. So that's sticking a needle into the artery at the wrist, and you take out the blood. And then on the blood gas measurements, you measure a number of different items on that, like the pressure of oxygen in the blood, the pressure of carbon dioxide, the amount of acid in the blood called the pH, and you get all these different measurements, and you also get the oxygen saturation, and that is how much of the hemoglobin, the protein in the blood that carries the oxygen, how much of that hemoglobin is saturated with oxygen. And we know in Mr. Floyd that it was 98% saturated.
So 98% saturated with oxygen?
With oxygen when they measured it in Hennepin County. And
So
that was 9/16, the time frame.
So if we know that there's an oxygen saturation of 98%, does that tell us anything whatsoever?
Yes,
about what?
I'm sorry, I interrupt. I apologize.
Does that tell us anything whatsoever about what the carbon monoxide content could have been at a maximum in?
Yes, it does. It tells us that if the hemoglobin is saturated at 98%, it tells you all there was for everything else is 2%, and so the maximum amount of carbon monoxide would be 2%. It tells you the maximum amount of carboxyhemoglobin. That was what was mentioned yesterday. The maximum amount is 2%. It doesn't even tell you that it is 2%. It could be something else. But 2% of carboxyhemoglobin is within the normal range. You and I have levels of carboxyhemoglobin of somewhere between 0 and 3.
And so in other words, as to the statement that his carboxyhemoglobin could have increased by 10 to 18%, in your view, that's not possible.
It's simply wrong.
And it was at most 2%.
At most 2%.
Normal.
Which is normal.
New subject to discuss with you. You might recall, if you were listening to the testimony, my discussing with Dr. Fowler the hypopharynx.
Yes, I remember.
And you might recall I spent some time asking him about what research he had done on the potential for pressure on the back to narrow the hypopharynx.
Yeah, I recall that.
Do you recall him saying he had canvassed the literature and he could not find anything?
I'm sorry.
Do you recall him saying he had reviewed the research and that he could not find anything?
Yes, I recall him saying that.
Are you able to enlighten or give any information to the jury on the nature of the research on the hypopharynx and how it narrows with compression in the prone position?
Yeah. So, the research on this, which is extensive, is really in the scientific literature. It's in the physiological literature. And then that is applied over to clinical medicine. So the type of studies that are done are not really done in terms of ordinary clinical research. It's much more physiological, much more scientific of how the body works. And there's about probably at least a dozen, maybe 20 studies that show the relationship between how that if you lower the size of the lungs, you must get a decrease in the size of the hypopharynx. All of the studies show that.
And then are there studies then that look at whether the pressure on the neck narrows the hypopharynx?
No. Because when we do research, we try and do research on studies that might be puzzling, that you would be kind of expecting a bit of a surprise. If you think about sticking your fingers into your neck, you know you're going to narrow the hypopharynx. That's not kind of research that somebody is going to want to do. It's so common sense that you would know that that's going to happen. I mean, you can do it on yourself if you want. And as soon as you put pressure here, you can immediately sense that your upper airway is narrowing.
Dr. Tobin, that is all we wanted to clarify with you this morning.
Okay.
If I may have 2 minutes.
Sure. Let's do a stretch break in place. There's the jury. We're going to actually have a recess now until 1:45, so we'll reconvene at that time. Still under oath, Dr. Tobin.
Okay.
Mr. Nelson.
Just have a few follow-up questions for you, Dr. Tobin. Thank you. In terms of the carbon monoxide testing that you referenced, you would agree with me that the most common technology available in hospital laboratories for analyzing the blood is the multiple wavelength spectrophotometer, also known as the co-oximeter, correct?
Right. Yeah.
Now, in terms of your testimony relevant to the research, you referenced that there were 12 to 20 studies, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Yep.
that an increase in pressure on the lungs would increase the narrowing of the hypopharynx.
Not quite.
Okay, can you just say it again?
Yeah, I mean, it is that if you decrease the size of the lungs, that you will get narrowing of the hypopharynx.
And that research would be in physiological journals?
It would be in physiological journals. There's some journals that will be a blend of physiology plus clinical. It will be, but it's primarily going to be in physiological oriented journals.
And those physiological oriented journals would be included within the general search for medical literature?
I mean, if you go into PubMed, it would be included in PubMed, yes.
And you have not produced any of those 12 to 20 articles for the state or I to review?
I mean, I listed several articles in my report of January the 27th. There's several articles in that. I can tell you them if you want to.
Specifically that stand for that proposition?
Regarding the relationship between lung volume and the hypopharynx.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Any further?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, Doctor. You may step down and you are excused.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Mr. Blackwell.
Your Honor, the state of Minnesota rests.
Mr. Nilsson, anything further?
No, Your Honor.
All right, members of the jury, the evidence is now complete for this case. Next step for you is to listen to closing arguments and then retire for deliberations. That'll occur on Monday. The attorneys and I will still be working. We have a few administrative matters and legal matters to take care of. Most importantly, going over the law that I will give you in my instructions. And that takes quite a while. And so we are not going to change our schedule. We're not going to close tomorrow. We're going to close on Monday. And so with that, remember, you will be sequestered. We have some of your questions, and we're going to try and answer as many of those as we can. I think the one thing that you need to know today as you leave is, how much do I pack? If I were you, I would plan for long and hope for short. Basically, it's up to the jury how long you deliberate, how long you need to come to a unanimous decision on any count. And so because that's entirely up to you, whether it's an hour or a week, it's entirely within your province. So that's how I would do it if I were you. We'll also give you some information probably Monday as you retire as to other questions that don't require your immediate attention. And we will also be probably giving you some hints as far as technology. We will be operating under the rules that are currently in place regarding audio and video evidence. And that is specifically that you will be provided with a laptop computer that has all the audio and video, in fact, pretty much all the exhibits in this case, on the computer, and with a large monitor to play them. You will not have to come back into the courtroom each time you want to look at the audio or video, which is the old rules, which involves a lot of back and forth. We're not going to do that. We're just going to give you that computer with the arrangements so that you can view it as you deem appropriate as part of your deliberations. So with that, I wish you a good long weekend, and we will see you Monday morning. We will convene at 9 a.m. for closing arguments and final instructions. Thank you so much. All rise for the jury. we are still on the record outside the hearing of the jury. With regard to the charge conference, I think the parties had agreed that we could do this informally off the record in chambers. Is that correct from the state? Yes, Mr. Nelson. Okay, Mr. Chauvin, you have the right to be present at all phases of the trial. That would actually include the charge conference. But basically, you'd be watching the lawyers and I wordsmithing the instructions, and I think you already have a copy. You want to be present for that, or are you willing to waive your presence?
I can waive it now.
All right. We'd probably put any discussions on the record just to memorialize what we've decided, and you're willing for us to do that without you present, is that correct?
That's right.
Any requests that have already been made by the attorneys as far as proposed instructions, that constitutes a motion for me to give those instructions to the jury. So there's no need for your lawyer to object to anything, because if I don't give anything your lawyer says, that's essentially denying the motion for that proposed instruction. The same thing is true for the state. Any of their proposed instructions memorialize their request. There is no need for an additional motion objecting to whatever I decide is the final instructions. So with that, also, we have all been talking about the appropriate way to deal with questions from the jury. Occasionally, jury questions will arise. I think our preference is that we not move the jury around if we can avoid it, and also that we not have people coming and going from the government center, since you will not be required to stay here at the government center while the deliberation is occurring. Accordingly, our plan is that we do any questions by Zoom. If you recall earlier when I brought back several of the jurors who had been selected to talk about the possible effect that Minneapolis city settlement had, that's how we would do jury questions. In other words, they would be able to see us, we would be able to see them. And when I say we, I mean the parties, yourself. But the jury, because they're anonymous, would not be broadcast to the outside world. And that would be our plan for how to answer questions. Any questions that come to me from the jury, the first step is to talk to all the lawyers, get their input on how I should answer it. Very often it is rereading certain instructions, but in any case, I will talk to all the lawyers, and after talking with them, formulate what my answers are going to be. That will be on the record, but it will be by Zoom. Are you fine with that arrangement, since you don't have to be here? We would want you to be part of the Zoom, so you've got to be subject to getting in front of a computer, basically. Are you fine with that? All right. Anything else as far as before we go into the charge conference?
Not from the state, Your Honor.
Okay.
No, Your Honor.
All right. Then we are off the record until Monday at 9 a.m. Thank you.